pediatric occupational. Yeah. Sorry. So my name is Aniesa. I am a pediatric occupational therapist, and I set up Sensational Kids in about 2008. Yeah, and we work with kids in and around the area. And sensory processing is really one of those difficulties that has become quite prevalent and better understood. I hope. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and in an hour give you a brief introduction. I might skip over some bits. You will get these notes as a PDF. And yeah, I might talk very fast at some points or gloss over some things. It's just because I want to make sure that there's time for questions afterwards. Okay, so if that's all right, we shall move on. So for today, I thought we would just look at what is sensory processing, look at the concepts of sensory processing disorder, look at sensory modulation, because that's one of the areas where we see a lot of the difficulties, and then just go through kind of the three main senses, and look at some observations that we might use to draw our conclusions as OTs. Okay, we talk about sensory processing. It really it's how your body and your brain is taking all the information that's coming in from the environment, from outside, how it is sorting through it, organizing it, and then making sure that it's delivered to your brain in such a way that it can be used effectively to meet the demands of the environment or meet the demands of that situation. We talk about the central nervous system as being an open system. So we have information coming in, information is organized, it's processed, and then we then end up producing different feelings and thoughts and motor responses. And we have all that is happening kind of on an unconscious level. Okay, it's happening in the background, whereas things like your thinking and your cognition are more conscious processes. Okay. Your sensory processing happens automatically in what we call normal development. It starts from the point when that baby is in the womb, and it keeps on developing and maturing. We say usually by the ages of 8 to 10, your sensory system should be well integrated, but also we know that the brain is so amazing and we have neuroplasticity and that we can make changes well after this. And that's obviously where we put in all our sensory strategies and our sensory integration therapy. Okay. Some terms you might hear when you think about sensory processing disorder is we talk about the modulation. We're going to go more into that. You talk about the more praxis-based, so planning and organizing, and then we're going to look at our discrimination. At this point, I'm going to say that sensory processing disorder is not a standalone diagnosis in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostics manual, and it's also not recognized in the British one, which I can't remember the name of right now, but it does fall as part of the autism spectrum diagnosis. And so what we are trying to do as OTs, certainly at Sensational Kids, is just quantifying and qualifying sensory processing difficulties and challenges and how those are impacting a child and their everyday functioning and their day-to-day life. Okay. When we talk about sensory modulation difficulties, so this is when we talk about any of the senses, and it's when you can either over-respond, under-respond, or you can have both. Okay. When you have your sensory seeking behaviors, that's, you have these massive delays in the information coming in and your responses are diminished. So what happens is that you're then going to not respond to things like pain. You're not going to have that inner drive. You'll often just ignore things around you, or just not be as aware of them, a little bit oblivious. Once kids, and so this is for the sensory dormancy side, so once kids then get into it, they might just do that to the exclusion of everything else. And as with the others, your sensory dormancy or your seeking behavior will then change depending on the day, your mood, so all of those factors. Okay. When we talk about our sensory defensiveness, this is when we start excuse me, avoiding things. And so you can have sensory defensiveness in all of your sensory systems, or just some of your sensory systems. Okay. And basically we say when you have defensiveness, it's when you have aversive or defensive reactions or responses to stimuli or input, which really shouldn't be causing that response. So we can call them non-noxious stimuli. And it's kind of an umbrella term that covers all of your insecurities and your defensivenesses in all the systems. You can have, when you find someone has sensory defensiveness, you will quite often get a lot of social and behavioral responses, social emotional behaviors. So you can have a lot of anxiety. You can have kids who just, and adults who just find things irritating and annoying, or they might think that something is just dangerous. And what I often see is that kids have had these learned patterns of behavior, of ways that they can avoid different sensations. And sometimes what you can get is you can have that really innocent memories can be stored as traumatic. And you constantly have this fight or flight mode that's happening there. And then with your simultaneous, you can swing to both ends of the continuum. And, you know, we could say that sometimes it could be circular as well. And a neurodivergent or atypical individual can go from dormancy to defensiveness, or vice versa. And sometimes they might not go through the mid-range. So it might be a case of just actually switching over quite quickly, depending on that person's, on their responses. Okay. And then we say with individuals who are have autism spectrum disorder, they can be quite more susceptible to fluctuating responses. Okay. And that it can often reflect then as your simultaneous presentation.
Okay, so what is executive functions?
Oh,
so really it's about looking at an
I can hear myself somewhere, Tom.
Yeah, I believe somebody's got there. Is possibly watching another session. If everyone can just make sure they're on mute, that'd be brilliant.
Thank you. Okay. Right, thank you for that. Okay, so that's just another way of representing our kind of the continuum of sensory modulation. And basically what you see is that in all areas you have that impaired social behavior, you have poor attention, your learning is affected, and you just have this general enjoyment of life is limited and affected. So we'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about each of the senses. There we go, just another way of putting it. Yeah. Now I am going to, before we move on, if you can put in the chat, I want to see who can be the fastest. If you can start typing the 8 senses, and I'll say go. No one's typing. Anyone? Don't make me pick on someone. Anyone know the senses?
Sorry, how do you type in? Where is that?
Hearing, yes. Touch, proprioception. In the chat box, yes. Someone said proprioception, that's the big one. Taste, sight, interoception. Well done, Romy. Yep, okay. And then it all came through at once. Excellent. Well done, guys. So if we stop there, yeah. So you can see that we actually have 8 senses and not the usual 5. And so that's also important to remember. Okay. Right. Oh, there we go. So we talk about our foundation senses, and then we have our functional ones. So when we think about our foundational senses, we think about our touch system, our vestibular system, proprioception, and interoception. Okay, and I will get onto these in a bit more detail in a bit. So those are kind of our, yeah, as I've said, the foundational senses. And then we come on to, I've just skipped ahead a little bit there. 1 second. And then we talk about our functional senses. So our vision, our sight, our hearing, our taste. Yeah. I am going to spend a little bit of time just going through these 3 because they're just super important. And I literally in every single session that I do, I will work on these 3 sensory systems. Okay. We talk about our tactile system. I think this is one of the most, if not the most important sense. It's going to give you information about everything that's happening around you, the texture of items, the shape, the size. It is really, really important in helping us bond and making those emotional connections. If you think, when you have, I can remember when my kids were born, you do that skin to skin with the mum and the dad, and that's still happening because it is just so important for that bonding. If I think of the number of times that I use touch just on a day-to-day basis, whether it's just to ruffle my son's hair, which annoys him because he's a teenager now, or just to give a friend a little squeeze on the forearm and say, hey, are you okay? So we use that all the time. And I think it's just so important. Okay. It's really important for manipulating objects and using tools. So if you can think of your fine motor skills, if you just have a second and just think about this morning, getting dressed, all the bits that you did where you were using your touch. Okay. And we talk about our 2 parts. We have this protective system, and then we have our discriminative system. And they both work well, or have to work well together and separately. Your protective system is going to say, oh, that tea is hot, so I need to move myself away from it. It's that constant fight, flight, freeze response. So it's kind of more of the older brain, as they say. And then when we're talking about our discrimination, it's where we know if I'm touched on that part of my hand, I'll know that I was touched there rather than on the palm of my hand. Okay, it is what will allow me to keep looking and say, oh, I know there's a ball or something in my drawer, and I'm going to feel in my drawer, which is very messy, by the way. And I know that, yeah, I think I found that soft ball, as opposed to, now let's see, the hard ball. Okay. And that's really important if you think about a child being at school and opening their pencil case and still paying attention to the teacher and being able to feel in their pencil case for the sharpener or the eraser. Okay. What does a child who struggles with their tactile system looks like? So you can, as I've said before, you can have both ends of the spectrum. So you can have a child who needs to touch everything. They need to lick objects. These are the kids who will touch the teacher's hair at school. They'll run their hands along walls. They just need to touch pretty much everything, okay? Your fine motor skills are going to be affected. These are kids who are either going to notice, they're not going to notice when they're dirty. So there'll be food all over their faces. They won't know when they've been touched. You know, they need additional feedback. They might have such poor discrimination that they will drop things. Quite often the child who drops his pencil a lot. A child who's constantly covered in bruises and they have no idea how they got their bruises, or an adult as well. Or they could have a really low pain threshold. So when they have a paper cut, it's like their finger needs to be chopped off, or it has been chopped off. And that then comes into your over responsivity. So these are the kids who really are constantly in fight or flight. So any light touch, they just won't be happy with that. Food, certain food textures, lumpy food, the clothing that they wear, any labels. These are the kids who, you know, they are tiny, but they can eat their food, which should be, you know, say they're 2 and they're eating a yogurt, they should be fairly messy, but these are the kids who will eat really, really carefully because they don't want that additional feedback on them. Okay, these are the kids who don't want to do a handprint for Father's Day card, or they don't want to do messy play or play with sand. Anything like art, any new experiences. And then also just self-care. Self-care becomes a massive battle and a big kind of emotional hurdle for these families, because it's things like getting dressed, having a shower, having a bath, nail cutting, all of those things. These kids and adults will resist them or find them just really, really hard to do. It is really important that you are aware that we have 2 kind of pathways. So I'm simplifying a little bit. You've got your light touch and you've got your deep pressure. Okay. And when you have that hypersensitivity, what we say is something like light touch will just accumulate. And it can take a long time to subside. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is, if you can either have your videos on or off, I don't mind, but if you look at this inside of your forearm, okay, I want you to do this now if you can, if you want to, and just very lightly just stroke that part of your arm. Now, some people will be very happy to do that for a very long time and they can happily sit there, whereas some of us will be rubbing that out because actually it just doesn't feel great. Feel free to put in the chat box how that was for you. But the reason I use that to explain is that light touch has a much longer effect and it takes a longer time to get processed. So deep pressure will override that. So like when you rub it out, okay? And that's why one of the most important strategies that we talk about, or that we say for dealing with tactile defensiveness, is deep pressure, okay? And think about those kids who are going to be hitting out, perhaps, who won't be able to tell us, you know, just exactly how they're feeling. So yeah. So you can see there when we talk about our intervention, we say avoid light touch. Okay. You'll find people in life who are very touchy and they'll always be, you know, ruffling kids' hair and you know, jostling them and saying hi that way. And actually, for the child who's hypersensitive, or the young person who's hypersensitive to touch, hyper-responsive to touch, they're going to find that incredibly overwhelming, and they're going to be in this high state of anxiety. Okay. it can get to a point where young people won't, or the kids won't want to leave the house because they'll have to wear certain clothes. And, you know, it affects adults, affects kids, and you don't have to have another diagnosis to say or to know that you are tactile defensive. My husband, for example, is very much a, if you can please get me some new shirts, I don't care what they look like, he'll say to me, as long as they're soft. Okay. And it's that type of feedback and that type of behaviors that you start seeing. Quite often kids who are hypersensitive or defensive can look very controlling and can become very controlling and very rigid, because that's how they are knowing that they're going to survive. Okay. So things that we can do either at home or at school is you're going to have your deep pressure, okay, deep pressure massages, your squashes with the peanut ball, and your therapist might recommend therapeutic brushing. Now, therapeutic brushing, I don't want to say too much about it because it is a very, very intense and restrictive program, but and it does work, but it's very prescriptive. So a lot of parents just don't have the time to do that, and it needs to be done every hour and a half throughout the day. So that one, we say, if I do have parents who want to do that, you know, it's a commitment, because once you start, you need to really give it a good go. Vibration, you get a lot of deep pressure from vibration, but you also get proprioception from a vibration, and we'll get onto that in a little bit. So quite often when kids are struggling with cleaning their teeth, I would recommend a vibrating toothbrush for them to play with and hold, not just when they are doing their teeth, okay, because it just helps with that whole sensation. Doing your tactile play, so dry pasta, you know, those little pellets that come in your packaging, really dry sand, and then gradually you'll build that up to become more wet, okay? So you might have some foam in the pasta, or you might have some cooked pasta in the dry pasta, that type of thing, okay? Soapy foam is amazing. You can get it at Sainsbury's. I think it's £2. And it's great because it dries clear and can be molded. And so that's something we go through a lot. We talk about giving kids tactile fidgets, and at high school, we like to call them focus tools rather than fidget toys. And it's always a case of trying to make them really discreet. And I always say to older kids who are perhaps at mainstream schools, that actually when you have a fidget, it's a focus tool, and you have to, we have to work together to make sure that that tool is not going to distract you, but it's also not going to distract everyone else around you, okay? We talk about heavy work, so pushing, pulling, lifting items, that's all going to really help with the regulation. Okay, so I'm just going to drink. We can talk about giving kids some chews, which I will get onto a little bit more in proprioception. Using straws to suck like a drinking yogurt is going to have a lot of good input, and can be very organizing, very regulating. So like your smoothies, you know, use a smaller straw if you can. Blowing bubbles is incredibly regulating. You know, just doing those bubble mountains, and even some of the older kids still really enjoy those. Chewy foods. So you've got your beef jerky, your pretzels, your bagels, and in really special circumstances, we will be able to get a child to use gum at school, okay, for their regulation. But that's kind of like the not a last resort, but we need to know that it's really going to work and it's going to be really beneficial for that child. Okay. If we get on to, so I'm just going to check the chat. Is there anything in there? No. I thought there was a message, never mind. So if we think about our vestibular system, so that is our sense of movement. I'm just trying to see if I have a clear bottle, which I don't. So we talk about our vestibular system, and it's located in our inner ear, and it tells us about our head position. So whether we are turning our heads, whether we're going up and down, whether we're upside down, and whether there's a stop start, okay? And that's really going to help us know where we are in space. And it is really, really important for our balance system. It helps us sit upright, helps our core, our postural stability, and lets you know kind of if you're moving or if someone else is moving. You know, that sensation you sometimes get when you are perhaps on a train and your train is still, but the other train is moving, and it's that feeling that sometimes you can have that little small amount of disorientation. Your vestibular system or movement is really important in helping us stay alert and keeping our arousal levels at the right level for what we need to be doing at that point in time. Okay, really important for the eyes, the head, the body, and that whole, like the coordination of it. And as I said, it's your muscle tone, holding yourself up against gravity. So if you have a child who's got who really struggles with their vestibular system, what you're going to find is when they're trying to sit upright to write, they already have this massive hurdle of just trying to hold themselves upright before they even pick up a pencil. Okay. How I describe the vestibular system is if you can imagine that you've got inside your in your inner ear, you've got these tiny little hairs and you've got fluid, okay, and the fluid will go over the little hairs. So when you are well, I'm now gently spinning or rotating, when you are pushing a buggy or you're rocking a baby, the message that's getting sent there, or like if you're on a train and you fall asleep, the message that is getting sent is that, do you know what, brain, everything is fine, everything is okay, we can just relax. And then you might even fall asleep, or you'll find that you're still swaying and rocking and you no longer have the baby that you were rocking to sleep in the first place, okay? And then the opposite of that is when you have a lot of change in movement. So if you imagine the fluids, it's kind of like you now have a calm sea and then suddenly there's a storm, okay? So what the message is being sent is that actually there's a lot of stop-start movements, there's a lot of rotation. So if you think of a roller coaster, think of running and crashing and jumping. There's a lot of different positions that your head's going to be put in. And so that message that is getting sent is more one of, oh, we need to be alert, something might change, let's just, you know, get ready because, yeah, something could happen soon. Okay. When you have kids who struggle with their vestibular processing, you might have kids who just cannot sit still. They quite often will be the ones who are falling out of their chairs. They're spinning all the time. They're swinging off things. They climb onto everything, climb onto cupboards. These are the kids who we say they run everywhere. They can't just walk, or they bounce to get that extra kind of feedback. Quite often you can see that they will fall quite often. They can be quite clumsy, have really poor balance, and quite often with that we can see that their muscle tone is reduced. Okay. If you have a child who is over responsive, what you might find is that they don't like it when their feet leave the ground. They like to feel really stable. When you perhaps are having them in the bath and you want to rinse their hair, they are really going to be quite rigid when you want them to lean backwards so that you can rinse their hair. So any movement, that's kind of what we say in the negative space, that they don't know what's happening, they're really not going to like that. Okay, they struggle to bend forward and come back up. They're going to find that is just feeling really uncomfortable. You might get some motion sickness, and you can also get those kids who they have a little bit of movement and then they are completely overexcited after it. Okay, because they just can't process it well enough. So in what we say is to have brain breaks, which basically is a movement break, okay? And try and get this in throughout the day. Things like just bouncing on a peanut ball, bouncing on a therapy ball, bouncing on a small trampoline, making obstacle courses in your lounge. You know, I am not very precious with our stuff at home, which, you know, we can't be when we've had 2 kids, 2 cats, 3 cats, 2 dogs. It's a bit of a mess. So making obstacle courses, jumping from one cushion to the next, giving kids that opportunity to do things like use their scooters, but being on their tummies is super, super important, okay? Trying to use wobble cushions, and I'm sure you're all familiar with wobble cushions. If you're not, I can go and find some. So using wobble cushions, using balance boards. I am a big advocate of using standing desks. So right now my laptop is on a laptop stand, but I actually, because they are so cheap compared to the big built standing desks, you can have a few in the class, okay? And that's really important. Some kids do their best work when they're standing up or when they're walking and pacing. So yeah, those are just some of the things that we can think of, okay? I was doing some actually, well, I'll mention this after the proprioceptive system because they all work together. Okay, when we talk about our proprioception, these receptors are located in all our joints and our muscles, and they're going to tell us where our bodies are in space in relation to us. So where my hand is in relation to my shoulder, but also in relation to something that may be on the table, and something that I want to do. So it is what is going to let me still look at you, but know that I have a cup of tea, know how much force I need to use to lift it up, okay, and be able to look at you, bring it up to my mouth, have a sip, and hopefully not spill too much. And this is a good point because I need a little drink. And then being able to put it down gently. So grading of force and pressure is a massive, massive sign of proprioceptive functioning not going so well, okay? So it's really important to help us just move around a room, to sit up straight, you know, to work on our gross motor skills, but then also your fine motor skills, okay? It's if you are dribbling a ball or kicking a ball, being able to adjust your body position quite skillfully and easily and know how hard you need to kick this time, or you've kicked hard, it went that side, so I'm going to move my body this way, okay? It's being able to do all of that without looking at every movement that your hand is making, okay? If you are struggling with processing proprioception, and I wish you could see my legs right now because they are literally jiggling, as you've got kids who are constantly jumping, stomping, they jiggle, they are tapping and clapping, and also a lot of humming, because when you hum, I mean, you can all just do this. If you just put your stay on mute though. If you put your hand over there and you just hum or just make a sound, you can feel the vibrations, and vibrations are a form of proprioception. Okay. Kids who are constantly clicking their pens maybe and driving teachers absolutely insane, or biting our nails, biting our collars and our sleeves. I mean, the number of kids who like, they have these really frayed sleeves and collars and ties, because they are just constantly looking for that movement with that feedback. Okay. And when they are under responsive, these kids might just bump into others, constantly leaning because they can't actually hold themselves up, slumping at a desk, sitting with a curved back, having to put their head in their hands to hold themselves up, and just looking really weak and clumsy, and these kids are really cautious. I was assessing a boy a couple of weeks ago, and one of the activities is carrying a tray with 2 glasses of water, and he was walking so slowly and rigidly because he was doing every little movement, because he just didn't know where his body was in space. Okay. These kids will have a really low endurance, they'll get tired quite quickly, and generally will avoid kind of the big equipment on the playground. Yeah. Quite rarely you can have someone who is over responsive to proprioception, and so they will just be really rigid, won't move a lot. Yeah, but that's quite rare. Okay. So again, when we talk about proprioception, this is where we talk about our heavy, hard, heavy work activity. So you're pushing, you're pulling, your resistance, squashing items, TheraBand, pulling your TheraBand, foot fidgets. I just discovered one. I'm just gonna show you. I actually put this under my desk, so I don't know if you can see that. It's on like a little cone, and you put your feet on there, and I've just discovered that it's actually really amazing. So yeah, foot fidgets are amazing, or just simply having like some TheraBand on their chair legs where they can put their feet on. We've also started using some bungee with a tennis ball for kids to put their feet on and just get that movement while they are expected to be sitting still. A little side note, one of my bugbears is when teachers and parents, and I am so guilty of this, say to their kids, sit still, because cognitively sitting still is incredibly hard to do. Okay. And if you have a child who's a bit more literal, they're just going to sit there because Miss said sit still. So I don't know if that means I can scratch my nose or that type of thing. Okay, so we try and give things like the wobble cushions, the ball chairs, the tea stools, using a lot of vibration, and then having those fidgets just attached so they are discreet and they are just close by and they can use them. Okay, they are a lot of, so I'm just having a quick look, pencil toppers for chewing. Yeah, so there's a lot that we can do, and it doesn't have to be expensive either. Okay, so when we do OT, a lot of our things we're going to be looking at having objects that are weighted, doing a lot of the pushing, the pulling, the lifting. So quite often, when a child comes in for a session, things are lying around, for example, big crash mats. And I know for myself how organizing it is to move things around, move furniture around. And so just to get that child organized and make that transition, I'll say, right, help me move all of these, let's put the cushions over there. Let's move the blocks and put them in a different place. So you want to get all that active movement. Okay. And that's really important. But with proprioception is it has to be that active movement. So you are activating your proprioceptors. You know, things like your ball pool or climbing walls, anything with resistance. So you've got your body socks or your lycra tunnels or your lycra sheets are amazing as well. Okay. I'm just trying to think. I've mentioned quite a lot already: running, jumping. Yeah. Okay, I've got some time. I'm just going to quickly skim over the auditory system. So if kids are struggling with auditory processing, you're going to find that put them in a noisy environment and they just cannot cope. Giving them verbal instructions is just not going to be working for them. Okay. Quite often places like churches and swimming pools have quite different acoustics. And so you might find that kids really struggle in those environments. Yeah. Humming or singing, vocalizing. I hum constantly. And my son, who shares our little study, he's 17 now, he's incredibly sound sensitive. So it's just fun and games in our house. And I sing all the time. I have like hello songs and goodbye songs for the dogs. It used to be for the kids, but then they got annoyed. But now I sing for the dogs, and I'm just constantly singing. So you might also then get these kids who don't like the noise, and they'll startle quite easily. Every little noise, they will be upset by it. And you'll find that they perform worse in things like PE assemblies, for example. Okay. Some strategies that we use or that we advise parents and teachers to use is things like giving them that vestibular input, because it's so closely linked. Using ear defenders, noise cancelling headphones. I really like, just to dampen the sound, you now have the flare earplugs. I don't know if anyone's familiar with those. They're kind of an earplug, but they're open. They have a little hole in them, so they just dampen the sounds. Also, the moldable silicone earplugs are really, really good. We can then look at also doing some therapeutic listening interventions. So either the really strict program or more of the quick shift program as well, just to work on that sound, that auditory system. Okay. So we talk about our visual system. So these are kids who really can't cope when there are a lot of things around them. And, you know, I've been into so many classrooms where you've got every single wall is covered and you've got things hanging down from the ceilings. And yes, some kids, that's absolutely fine. But for those kids who need to look at absolutely everything, it's going to be so overwhelming. Okay, these are the kids who need to look. Every time something moves, they need to look and see what it is. Okay, you might find things like they will have behaviors such as shaking their heads, looking at the corners of their eyes, because everything looks different then. And so they're creating that additional input for themselves. You know, you might get kids who will be poking their eyes, because actually that creates quite a groovy little pattern. And they might do things like they'll line things up and then they'll look at it from a certain angle, because that just, it looks good. Okay. You might find that kids will often want sunglasses, or they'll hate being outside in the bright light. And, you know, those are fairly easy accommodations to make. Give them some dark glasses to wear in class. Give them a little hat to wear in class. Well, I think it should be quite straightforward to make accommodations like that. You know, controlling the environment, just trying to make things a little bit emptier. You know, things like marble runs are great, because they get to build the marble run and then they get to watch, especially if it's clear, they get to watch the marbles fall through. Okay, gel times are great. Yeah. Right, I am just going to, let's have a think. So in terms of what we do as OTs, we will look at gathering information and trying to find clusters or patterns of behavior. if you have a child who is constantly moving their feet, but they're getting their work done, it's not affecting them. I really like to say, if it's not affecting how they are emotionally regulated, how they are coping with the demands, how they are making those connections, then I wouldn't think it's something that we need to address, because it's not interfering, if that makes sense. And quite often when we do assessments, we will always send questionnaires to home and to school, so we can get that information. It's not uncommon to have 2 very different questionnaires being returned, because kids act differently. So you might have the child who's really holding it all together at school, and they are really good at masking or just holding it together, and the minute they come out of school, it's massive explosion. So I had one of those who just used to, work so hard all day at school to be good, to listen, to follow instructions, and then come home and would just explode. Or you have kids who are perfect at home, absolutely great, and then they get to school, and because the environment is so different, you've got noise, you've got kids around you, you've got people sniffling and moving things, these kids are really, really struggling in that environment. Okay, so that is that. A little bit, I'm just gonna touch on this. So a little bit about sensory integration and what a sensory integration session actually looks like. There is a whole list, a set of what we call fidelity, and we have to make sure that if we are saying that we are doing air sensory integration, that we are ticking off those little boxes. Okay, it is very child directed. It looks like play because it is play. It is having fun, knowing when to push the child, when to step back, and it really is about that relationship between the child, the therapist, and the parent who's bringing them to sessions. So I work a little bit differently in that, and it's kind of changed over the years, and that I am very keen for parents to be involved, especially if you have those sensory difficulties affecting the home life. And so I'm very keen on the parent being in the session and working on that, and creating that relationship with the child. Okay. So it's all about kind of grading the activities. If you think of when you perhaps started taking your child to the playground, and what you see is that they will then want to use the slide. So they're going to climb up, they might stumble, they might fall into the child in front of them. And then once they're at the top, they're going to fumble trying to sit down. And then before they know it, they're at the bottom. Okay. And what you're going to see is that this child is then going to do it over and over and over until it becomes really smooth, until they can almost run up and whiz down. Then they're going to experiment and they're going to go down their backs, they're going to go down on their tummies. All of those things is that they are constantly trying to adapt it, so that they can just have more fun, really. Okay. We use a lot of sensory diets. We're kind of changing and just calling them sensory strategies, because sometimes people get confused by the word diets. And sensory diets have to be really, really individualized. They have to be personalized. They should not be that you are given a list and it's got 75 activities where it says, try this, try this, try that. A sensory diet is really having looked at the home or the school environment and saying, okay, in school, we are going to be using these 5 activities and we're going to use them throughout the day. And home might say, okay, at home, we're going to be using these 5 activities, or we'll do some of those, but we'll also have different, because things are slightly different at home. Okay, but these are going to be activities that's very, very individualized. It's something that you know for your child, if you do it or if you encourage them or facilitate them to do it a certain way, is really going to help them be organized and ready to learn and ready to cope with the demands of whatever it is that they are needing to be doing. Okay. There's also, I haven't put a slide in here, but I also use sensory ladders a lot. I'm going to stop the share there so we can do some questions. As also using sensory ladders, which is as just a different way of thinking about our sensory and emotional regulation. Okay, some questions, if that's all right, I'll just look at those quickly and you can ask me some more questions. So someone asked, is head shaking, so Andrew said it was too itchy for him. Yeah, so you probably rubbed it out. Someone said, is head shaking more likely to be visual or is it vestibular? It's a combination. So head shaking, you're going to get that big movements, but you also get the visual. Yeah. So it could be that as well. And yeah. Just trying to see. So are there, I'm now going to say questions, and I know that they're probably going to be, you might have lots, you might think, actually, and he said, it's such a great job, I don't have any questions because I got everything that I needed there. But while you're thinking, while you're asking questions, I'm just going to have a little cup of my tea, sip of my tea. Okay. You can also unmute if you want to ask your question. Yeah, so, okay. So we have, should you try to stop stimming? Is using different voices, pitch and tone, stimming and part of sensory regulation. Okay, so I don't think that we should try and stop stimming. I'm actually, before I continue answering that question, I'm just, for those of you who haven't heard my story before, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD last year when I was 42. And I had no idea that I had ADHD because it was just me. And as part of ADHD, I have a lot of difficulties with my sensory processing, and so I'm constantly trying to regulate. Okay, and also with ADHD, you can have quite, as I've said, I think in the last talk, your executive functioning is affected. But why I'm saying this is that if you try and stop someone from stimming, so if you were to say to me right now, you can't see under my desk, my legs are literally doing this. So if you said you have to stop jiggling your legs, that's going to be really hard for me. And jiggling my legs is actually helping me to pay attention. It's helping me stay alert and regulated. And it's helping me focus. So you can have the child who is trying to learn their times tables and they are hanging upside down, or the child in the classroom who is rolling around on the carpet and they are moving about. And when the teacher asks them a question, they can answer that question. Okay. Now, if that child were to be told to sit still, what we could find is that that's all they're going to be thinking about. They can't regulate themselves, so they aren't going to be taking in anything that you say. So to get back to your question about stopping stimming, I think if the stimming is distracting the child and it's stopping their learning, then we want to maybe get the sensation in a different way. So giving them perhaps a fidget or something that's going to have a similar impact or similar feel for them, especially sometimes if you have stimming that is harmful. So if that child is hurting themselves, you obviously want to stop that aspect of the stimming. But that's why we're going to try and give them a range of tools and strategies that they can use throughout the day. I think using different voices, pitches and tones, I think it can be just trying to regulate, just making different sounds. It feels good. You hear the different noises, and yeah, so I think it can be part of that sensory regulation. Was that okay, Rosie? Did that answer your question? Okay, then we have Aileen. Hi. What's the difference between SPD and ADHD? So, as I said before, you can't have a diagnosis or a standalone diagnosis of SPD. It usually comes with the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. With ADHD, you can have two types of ADHD. So you can have, it's now just called ADHD. It used to be ADD. So I was diagnosed with ADHD of the combined type. So I can have the inattentiveness, but also the hyperactivity. Okay. And the difference, I think, comes in is that you can have really specific sensory difficulties without having ADHD. And I hope that, is that all right? I hope that answered it a little bit. Yeah, so you will also find that kids and adults who have ADHD will be using a lot of sensory strategies to self-regulate, okay? Children who can get very loud in expressing their emotions and feelings. For example, the child who is tired can be very loud. Is that sensory? And yeah, it's probably a case of they are now at their limits. They don't actually know how to regulate that side of things because they are trying to regulate everything else. Yeah. So that is definitely can be that extreme emotional reactions and responses. And that's why when we look at things like the zones of regulation or your 5-point scale or sensory ladders, it's basically telling you when these things are going wrong for your senses, this is how you might respond, or use these sensory strategies to help you when you are feeling angry or anxious or worried. Okay. I think that my daughter may have dyspraxia. She also has joint hypermobility. What is the best way to get her assessed, please? So dyspraxia really, I think I am doing a talk on dyspraxia/DCD rather than your sensory dyspraxia. So dyspraxia, we diagnose only from the age of 5 and upwards, and it's a multidisciplinary diagnosis that needs to happen. So I can't just have a child come in and do an assessment and say, yes, they are dyspraxic, because we need to have input from, when I say dyspraxic, I'm going to say a child who has DCD, developmental coordination disorder. It needs to be a multidisciplinary, so a team assessment, because the pediatrician or the doctors are going to make sure that there are no neurological reasons for that clumsiness. And you're then going to look at how much it's affecting their day-to-day life. And then you're going to get the information from the OT and from home and school to then put that together. I would say you should approach your GP and go armed with a list of difficulties and how it's affecting that child functionally, how it's affecting their day-to-day, so their play, their self-care, their ability to, interact, how they're participating at school, and then ask for a referral to the local OT service. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And sucking fingers, is it a sign of a sensory need? Yes. Using our mouths is a really big way of getting additional feedback. So chewing gum, grinding your teeth, sucking your fingers, just having something that you're sucking is definitely a way of trying to self-regulate. Okay, cool. Everyone said thank you. I'm going to have some more tea. Are there any other questions? Anything? Someone's unmuted. Is that you, Victoria? Do you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Hi. I don't know if you can hear me. Hello. You mentioned lycra sheets earlier. Could you just slightly expand on that? Okay, thank you.
Okay. So lycra sheet, so you know what lycra is? It's like spandex. And lycra sheet you can buy on Amazon. I think they're about £30 is the max I would pay, depending on the size. And it's basically a tube of lycra that goes over the mattress. And you can then have kids lie between the mattress and the lycra sheet. And I'm just going to quickly try and get a picture up for you guys. But that is really, really useful for kids to push against. It gives them that additional feedback. And yes, it's also called a compression blanket. I'm going to see if I can quickly share this. So there, can you see that? That's a lycra sheet over there. And yeah, okay. And they come in different sizes. And yeah, I don't know if you can all see that. So yeah, lycra sheet over there. Yeah, and
so is that doing something different to a weighted blanket then? Because we have weighted blankets.
Yeah. So your lycra sheet is going to give you a lot of proprioception, because when you move against it, you're going to be getting that feedback from the lycra sheet, and you're going to be moving. A lot of parents use them throughout the day rather than just at bedtime. And again, it's about what's going to work for your child, right? And yeah, and then in terms of a weighted blanket, that is much more specific. It's looking at a child's, sorry, I just seem to have lost my mouse. Sorry. It's much more specific. It's looking at the weight, and you have like a little formula that you work out. So you're going to say, I think it's 5 to 7% of that child's body weight. And yeah, so that's how you're going to do it. Tom, I can't seem to get back to Zoom for some reason. I don't think it's anything you've done, but yeah, if you can still hear me, just let me know.
Sorry, Aniesa, what do you mean? Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to do that now, but I think my mouse has decided to die.
I do it for you. You're back on Zoom now.
Yeah, no, I can see that bit, but I just can't. Oh, I can see myself. Thanks. Yeah, and so it's weighted blankets, I always say use with caution. Use them, make sure that the child, the adult, the young person can remove the weighted blanket if they need to. I also say to parents, if you're using it at bedtime for that deep pressure, once your child is asleep, you can then remove it rather than having it on them the whole night. Okay, so that is in terms of the weighted blankets. Sorry, I can see my screen, it's just not coming. Very annoying. Right, were there other questions, Tom? Can you see other questions other than the lycra sheet?
Yes, so I've got one from Manju, who has asked if a child gets easily distracted, could that be linked to ADD?
It could be a range of things. So a child who gets easily distracted could be that they are struggling to process all the sensory inputs that's coming in from them. And it could also be an inattentive form of ADHD. So really, I think before anything like that, like before we say, oh, it's this or it's that, we would always do a much more detailed assessment. That makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. And we've got another one from Eileen, who said the coping mechanisms you've talked about and the OT interventions, do they cure or solve the sensitivity or just manage it? And is this a lifelong diagnosis?
Okay. So if we, I think it's a way of coping. If we think of us now, of ourselves as adults, we all do things throughout the day that is helping us stay regulated. Okay, so you've got the person who will go for a run at lunchtime, or we will gravitate towards jobs that are perhaps very quiet, where we don't have a lot of interaction with people. We will gravitate to jobs where we can be outside, where we are going to be maybe doing gardening, a lot of pushing and pulling and digging. So I think also everything changes throughout your life, and it changes. So we need to constantly be adapting. We habituate as well. I don't think of sensory processing as, we need to cure this. It's more about managing it and helping to change that sensory system so that it allows the child to just be happier, be more comfortable, be able to meet those demands of school, of the environment. It depends how you want to look at it in terms of, is it like this lifelong diagnosis? It's about managing it and giving that child, as they get older, helping them work on that awareness of, before my test, this is going to happen, so I can do X, Y, and Z. Okay, so I've had a young guy who is probably 14, and he really struggles with eating with his family. And so we put some things in place for him, that he would maybe have a quick rough and tumble with the dog, and then he would do some weights or some push-ups, and that would then help him be regulated enough so that he could do 5 minutes of mealtime with his family, because it was important to his family and also important to him. So I think as adults, we end up and we manage, and it's like the types of shoes we wear, it becomes very individual. Does that answer your question, Eileen? Do you want to unmute if it doesn't, or Tom can maybe read out what's in the box, because I still can't see my Zoom.
That answers it. Thank you, Aniesa.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Cool. And then I think we've just got a final one from Ekaterina, who has said that she has a tunnel like the blanket that was shown, and is that also quite beneficial?
Lycra tunnels are amazing. I really love Lycra. So if you ever looked at the clinic, you will see that I use Lycra all the time. I'm also a big advocate for using Lycra yourself and making your own Lycra swings and equipment, because it is so beneficial. It is so regulating and organizing and calming. So yes, Lycra tunnels are amazing. They're great. Lycra swings are fantastic. Yeah. So if you ever did come to the clinic to have a look, there's Lycra everywhere. Because I love Lycra. And kids really, well, having said that, I have worked recently with a couple of young girls who hated the sensation of Lycra, so we had to adapt it for them. But generally, Lycra is quite amazing. Okay. Do you know how to use your tunnel, Ekaterina?
Oh yes, we do. We've been shown in the past, so we just I wish we could use it more often, but I do use it, when it becomes very, when my child becomes very unsettled. So it's
And I think something, sorry, if I can just go on to what you've said there, is really, really important. With sensory strategies, we have to get ourselves and our kids and the schools into the habit of using and implementing sensory strategies throughout the day, not just when a child is really dysregulated, because we want to prevent that dysregulation, right? Because it's a build up. So if we can put things throughout the day, so if you can perhaps say, Ekaterina, every day before lunch, if your child is at home, we're going to go through the tunnel twice, or we're going to push a ball through the tunnel, or we're just going to do a starfish in the tunnel, and making it a regular part of your day is really, really important. So I've got parents who park further away from the school so that they can then scoot to the school with a heavier backpack to get that child ready for the first lesson. Yeah. And then through the day, we're going to give them those activities so they stay regulated. And that way they'll also start, as they're getting older and they develop that self-awareness, they're going to know what works for them. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, where are we? Any other questions?
I think that's everything.
Okay. So yeah, I will send you a copy of this PDF and then you can send that on. Yeah, thank you for listening. And again, any questions, just let me know. Tom, you are going to have to end the meeting because I can literally not do anything. Like I can't even leave the meeting. So yeah, you're going to have to.
Can you still not see them?
Yeah, just end the meeting rather than kicking me out because I'll feel really bad.
I will do that. You've just got some lovely messages from the attendees saying thank you, just because I know you can't see them, and that it was a brilliant talk.
Yeah, it was very short, but hopefully there's a lot of information you've got from that. Okay, and just remember, something I like to say is, something I mentioned to teachers that I forgot that I was going to say is, in a classroom, our teaching system is very traditional and we have kids sitting in rows facing forward and they have to sit still and they have to pay attention. And a point I made to teachers at a mainstream school last week was actually that teacher is walking up and down, that teacher is going to another child, they're writing on the board. So they are getting their sensory needs completely fulfilled throughout the lesson. Those kids aren't, okay? So we need to make sure that if I'm also really, really trying very hard that if I'm going to give a wobble cushion, I'm going to make sure that as far as possible that there are 3, 4, 5 wobble cushions in the class, because the one child who you might have put that wobble cushion there for is not going to be the only one who has those sensory needs. If you're going to do standing desks, put 2 or 3 so that the child doesn't feel singled out. And if you're modeling it for them, they know that actually we all have sensory needs. And sometimes Miss Aniesa needs to roll her shoulders. Anyone want to roll their shoulders with me? Oh, that actually feels quite nice. So it's that type of thing of normalizing. I hate the word normalize, but it's just an everyday thing. We all have sensory needs, and it's not a case of, okay, let's take little Johnny out to do his movement break or to do his sensory activities. It's just a part of life, and we need to start thinking that way and just thinking more flexibly and being more adaptable. As you can see, I can talk for hours, but I will stop now. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for attending, everyone, and thanks, Aniesa. I've put a few of our links in the chat box if you want to check out some more PCF stuff. We will be back in a couple of weeks for DCD / dyspraxia with Aniesa again. So do check out the Eventbrite page or our website and grab a ticket for that one. Cool. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day. We'll end it there.
Thank you.